Welcome to Change the World. My name's Guy Dauncey. This is the weekly show where I like to interview guests who are visionary, inspirational, doing stuff that, quite frankly, changes the world. And my guest today is David Suzuki. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks for having me.
So, as most viewers will know, David's an award-winning geneticist and broadcaster, the host of CBC's The Nature of Things for over 40 years, and the author or co-author of more than 50 books, many of which written for children. He's a companion of the Order of Canada. He's got 28 honorary degrees from universities in Canada, the US, and Australia. And for his support of, or for your support of Canada's Indigenous people, you've been honored with 8 names and formally adopted by 2 First Nations. So you've got a pretty big family out there with all these adopted.
I do. And once you get adopted, you get calls all the time. David, I need some money to put on a potlatch.
Oh, right. Yes. Potlatch tradition. Right. So when you think back over your life, David, and all your work to build a better world in 40, 50, 60 years, there must have been particular events and people you found really inspiring. Can you share a story about 1 or 2 of those people and events?
Well, I think of 2 people that immediately come to my mind. One is a man who had a fundamental change in my whole environmentalism. I was brought into the environmental movement by Rachel Carson in 1962 when she published Silent Spring. And at that time, I thought the problem was people were taking too much stuff out of the environment, trees and fish and soil, and putting too much garbage and toxic material back into it. So I thought the issue was we've got to have laws that regulate what you can take out and what you got to put back in, and then enforce the regulations. So I went to Haida Gwaii for the first time to do a film in about 1980. And I interviewed foresters, loggers, tourism operators, fishermen, and one of them was Gujao. Now, you know Gujao.
I've met Gujao, yes.
And Gujao was a young carver at that time, but he had led the fight against logging. And I said to him, look, I know you have a high level of unemployment among the Haida people, and a lot of the loggers are Haida. So logging is giving you economic opportunities. What difference does it make to you if they cut the trees down? And his answer was, well, I guess we'll be the same as everybody else then. And at that moment, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But when I got back to Vancouver and started thinking about it, I realized he was telling me that to him as a Haida, he doesn't see that he ends at his skin or his fingertips. That to him, being Haida meant being connected to that land, that the air, the water, the fish, the trees, all of that is what makes the Haida who they are. And you take away part of that, you take away a part of what it is to be Haida. And that's when I realized there is no environment out there, and we're here, and we have to regulate. We are the environment. It's us. It's in us. It's pumping through our bodies. We're breathing it in and out and exchanging it. That, for me, from Gujao, was a big insight. But I did want to mention one other person who changed my life, and this was in 1988. I went to Brazil for the first time, and we were doing a 2-hour special on the Amazon. And I heard about a young man who had taken his people, 200 people, deep into the Amazon forest to get away from the white people and roads and alcohol. And I met him, and he said, this is all through an interpreter, but he said, I've only discovered that the Brazilian government is going to build a dam that's going to flood our territory. And they didn't even tell us about it. He said, we're going to stop it. I need help. And so as a result of that, I said, well, what can I do? He said, I need money. So I called Tara out of the Amazon, my wife, said, we got to do something. I brought him up in a plane to Toronto and Ottawa. We raised $75,000. This is in 1988. And he said, the World Bank is putting up $500 million to build this dam. We don't want the dam built. We saw Michael Wilson, who was the finance minister, and we put pressure on Michael Wilson and got him to, as a World Bank on the board there, he said Canada pulls its support for this dam. He told us later he got more letters and calls about that dam than any other issue. And in the end, Payakan took all of that money down and he raised a huge demonstration, and the World Bank pulled its loan and killed the dam. He's continued to lead the fight because 40 years later, the dam is almost built. And that's because the government said, we don't need the World Bank anymore. We need the dam, and they're building it. And sadly, Payakan died last year from COVID. I'm glad to say that the David Suzuki Foundation has given a fellowship to his daughter. My wife and I have been supporting to put her through university. She's a lawyer now, and she's continuing the battle. Yeah. He changed. He was an inspiration because here was a man that grew up in the middle of the Amazon. He had no formal education, but he recognized that something was going on from the farmers that were burning his forests, the miners that were mining for gold, and the loggers that were coming in. And he decided that he was going to fight it, and he was successful.
Cool.
That was inspirational.
Thank you.
You know, if he could do it, why can't any Canadian do it too?
Yes. It's just having that inner courage to step up and do it. I know it's, for a lot of people, it seems intimidating, but when you get in the habit of it, it gets easier. So I want to talk about the climate emergency. And we share a joint friend in Seth Klein, who's the author of a newly published book called The Good War, Mobilizing for the Climate Emergency. And he believes that the world's governments should act to tackle the climate emergency with the same kind of urgency and immediacy that they did during World War II to defeat global tyranny and fascism. Do you share his take on the climate crisis and what needs to happen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the history of Canada is that we've had governments that have made promise after promise after promise to do something about it and then done nothing. And the reason is, I believe, we've always dealt with it as if it's a slow motion catastrophe. Oh yeah, well, we got to get off fossil fuels, but I mean, not until 2050 or 2080. And then governments are not accountable for making the agreement, but not meeting them because they're no longer in office. And what we need is the recognition this is an emergency. And like Pearl Harbor, when Pearl Harbor happened, Americans couldn't say, Canada was already in the war with Britain against Germany, but the United States, when Pearl Harbor happened, you got no choice. And what Seth's book tells you is what can be done when you take that, that acceptance. Yeah. We got no choice. I was just on a webinar with the National Farmers Union that I'm a member of, and I was delighted to see that one of the things, the whole thing was about climate change, but they said we must deal with this with a warlike mentality.
Yeah.
And that's and let me give you a good example that's really inspiring. I was in my last year in college in the United States in 1957. On October 4th, you're almost old enough to remember that, Guy. Do you remember what happened October 4th? Big event.
I was in high school, not even that. I was in prep school.
This is the middle of the Cold War, okay? And the Soviet Union at that time was really, really scary.
Okay, I was 9 years old in a school where we never had any news about anything in the world at all.
Okay, well, you missed on October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. And it was a shock. And every time that satellite came overhead, it was beeping as if it was thumbing its nose and saying, look at me, guys. The United States then they had 3 different rockets in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and every one blew up on television. Meanwhile, the Russians launched the first animal, a dog, Laika, the first man, Yuri Gagarin, the first team of cosmonauts, the first spacewalk, the first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. The Americans didn't blink. They said, we got to catch up to these guys. They poured money into science. They set up NASA. They pumped money into the National Science Fund. Here I am, a Canadian studying in the States. All I had to do was say, well, I like science. They threw money at you. It was a glorious time.
I can't help but saying, we're speaking today on the day when Trump has left office and President Biden is now office and Vice President Kamala Harris. Do you think the same kind of impulse, they might bring that back?
Well, that's the hope. If they accept that this is so critical. Now, he's done something very amazing to me. He says he's canceling the Keystone pipeline. That's huge, because the opposition within the United States, forget Canada, the opposition within the United States is huge. Now, by doing that, he gives our prime minister an excuse. The prime minister has spent $4.5 billion of our money to buy a pipeline that should not be built. Now, by canceling Keystone, Trudeau can say, gee, the Americans are canceling. We better think about this. Maybe it's not good to invest in more infrastructure. We should do other things. Yeah. That's Trudeau's opportunity, it seems to me. Let me finish the Sputnik story.
Okay.
In 1962, President John F. Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to put men on the moon and bring them back within a decade. When he said that, they didn't have a clue how they were going to do it. He just made the commitment. Now, they met it. They sent men back and over there and brought them back in less than a decade.
Yeah.
But think about the consequence of making that commitment. Every year when the Nobel Prizes in science are announced, guess who still gets most of them? They're Americans or scientists working in America. Because 60 years ago, President Kennedy said, we're going to race the Russians to the moon.
Yeah.
Every year, NASA publishes a magazine called Spin-Off, and it's filled with hundreds of things that have resulted from the space race. They had no idea it would happen,
Cool.
Cell phones.
So
But the important message is take the challenge, seize it like it's a war, and magic will happen.
So I'm sitting on these big questions and in a limited interview. So I want to get to our next one, which is diving deep into the cause of our troubles. So there's no disputing the gravity of the crisis we face in the world with the climate emergency, the biodiversity emergency, and all our other troubles. Do you think our crises have fundamental causes? And if so, what might they be? You have 2 minutes to answer this question.
Okay, well, the underlying root cause, I think, is a shift in the way we see ourselves in the world. For most of human history, we understood that nature was everything. Nature was the source of our lives, our livelihood, that we were utterly dependent on nature. And as we gave thanks for nature's abundance and generosity, we committed ourselves to a responsibility to do everything we could to keep it all going. We knew we lived in a web of relationships with other species of plants and animals, with air, water, soil, and sunlight. That was an ecocentric way of seeing ourselves. We were embedded in this web of relationships, and we had a responsibility. We have shifted fundamentally in the last 1,000 years or so, and it's epitomized, I think, in the Bible. If you're a Christian or a Jew, it says, we were made in the image of God. We're not just another furless ape. We're in the image of God. And God said, go forth and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And that then is an Anthropocene way of seeing the world. We're the center of the action. We're special, and everything out there is for us. And even environmentalists think, oh yeah, well, it's all about us, but we just have to be more careful. We have to rediscover an ecocentric way of living. Realize that our very livelihood and our well-being and our lives are utterly dependent on the state of nature. And we have a responsibility. So we've got to shift back to an ecocentric way of seeing ourselves, but we've constructed an economic system, a political system, and a legal system based on anthropocentrism.
Do you think that shift actually happens earlier than 1,000 years ago when we ceased being hunter-gatherers and moved into agriculture?
No, I don't think so. And I heard it today. Farmers at this meeting I was at, they were saying, we've known for years the season's changing. We can plant earlier, we can harvest later, but certain crops just won't grow as it's getting warmer. They're at the front line. Farmers have always known that we are dependent on nature, for God's sakes. Weather, climate, the seasons, farmers know that's important. They know insects are important for pollinating.
So what's happened around 1,000 years ago? You're talking like before the beginning of science with Roger Bacon and things like that, or is it the beginning of science itself that caused this?
Science itself. I think it began with this religious idea that we were special. For 99% of our time, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers and then farmers.
Yeah.
But then we began, and I think that it began in the Renaissance when you get people like Francis Bacon that say, scientia potestas est, knowledge is power. And knowledge was scientia, science, and knowledge can be used to improve the human lot. Yeah. And then you get Descartes saying, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The mind then became this dominant thing that it was something outside of the body. Yes. Almost. And then you get Isaac Newton, who saw the universe as a giant clockwork mechanism. So if everything is a giant machine, a mechanical, then you can look at the parts and then find a way of fitting them back together. Yeah. Well, that's not the way it is.
Okay,
so But I think the Industrial Revolution began the big shift because suddenly we were no longer bound by laws of nature. We could make telescopes, we could make microscopes, machines that could travel faster than any living organism. We could live in outer space. We could live in the oceans. So it seemed as if we're beyond the laws of nature. And that is...
The paradox is that your very career was based on the microscope as a geneticist, right?
Absolutely. I'm not saying that, we don't need the technology, but I'm just saying it created a sense that we are different because our intelligence enables us to escape the boundaries of nature.
So let me jump. I was going to ask about the economy. Maybe we come back to that, but I want to delve deeper into this because some people think that one of the reasons we're in such trouble is our relationship to nature is that the scientific way of thinking taught us to observe the multiple expressions of nature, the trees, the bees, the orcas, the salmon, as objective things and not as subjective beings that have agency and a spiritual existence of their own. Do orangutans and chimps have consciousness? Do salmon? Do plants? I'd love you to share your thoughts on that.
My attitude is stop trying to show that an animal, it can think like us, so that makes it special. What a lot of crap. I wrote about this the other day when I was in lockdown on Quadra Island. Each evening I would sit in a chair. Now I have I have to have full disclosure here. I love insects. I have loved them all my life. I collected them as a child. I studied an insect, a fruit fly, as a scientist. So I'm sitting there, and every night there would be this cloud of insects that were so small they were just like a zero on a page. They were tiny, right? But as you watched them, they're moving up and down. You think, what the hell's going on? What are they doing? Are they looking for a mate? Are they mating there? Like, what are they doing? And then I thought, they have a brain. They have eyes, they have legs, they have a stomach, they have reproductive. They're an organism just like you and me. And I think what they're doing is they're just dancing on air. They're celebrating who they are. They know who they are. They know where their place on this planet is. And their kind have survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Not bad. We think we're so bloody bright that the only indication something special if it does something that we do. What a lot of.
So then you're saying, yes, those insects, they have their own inner agency and they have their own kind of inner proto-consciousness. Really.
Yes. Yeah. Why not? Why not? I respect that.
Well, I know it's controversial. I mean, I read New Scientist every week, and 10 years ago, they never discussed the nature of consciousness. Now they do. And there are sort of brain scientists, neuroscientists who are beginning to realize that, they can't find a location for consciousness. Maybe it is everywhere. Maybe it pervades all existence. It's a big breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, if you want to define consciousness that way, I'm happy with that. The point is the arrogance of trying to impose even the concept of consciousness is an anthropocentric notion. We define it through what we know as
Yeah.
consciousness. But what an arrogant thing that is.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But if you think it is pure beingness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when I first met you, it was a little 5 minutes on or 3 minutes on the economy. When I first met you was at the Stein Valley Festival in Lytton in 1988. You won't remember, but I do, right? Because there was a festival there to protect the Stein Valley from being logged, one of the last untouched watersheds in the Southern Coast Mountains. And I just published my book called After the Crash, The Emergence of the Rainbow Economy. And you expressed your frustration then, this is like 30 years ago, on how the global economy worked. Surprise, surprise. Have you had, so that people would think of the forest just as a source of profit, not as anything bigger? Have you had any further thoughts about the way the economy functions since then?
We're trying to talk about a green economy, and we've got to look at market mechanisms to bring it under control, and look at these companies that are now subscribing to the idea of sustainability. And that's all very nice, but the system itself is so fundamentally wrong that even the good companies are still caught up in a system that demands that they make profit, and the more profit, the sooner, the better. I mean, that's the system it's a part of. Yeah. And I think it's crazy. This is, again, a result of our anthropocentrism. Look, you can't change the laws of nature. You can't change the fact that we need air, we need water, we need soil for food, we need sunlight. And those are all fundamental underpinnings of the way that we live. Other things, the economy, that's a human construct, as are our judicial systems, as are our political systems. Those are human constructs. You can't change nature. We keep trying to force nature to fit our economic needs. We got to breed trees that'll grow faster, fish that'll grow bigger. We're always trying to make nature conform to what our demands are, rather than the only thing we can change is the economy and the things that we create.
And the paradox is that within classical economics, or neoclassical, the one that's taught, the environment's an externality. It just doesn't fit their models at all.
Exactly. And so, there was an economist at UBC in the 70s who said the problem with our system is that money grows faster than real things, right? So our forests in BC grow at the rate of 2 to 3% per year. They say it adds fiber at 2 to 3% a year. Well, you don't have to be a genius to know, gee, if you cut down 2% or less of your trees every year, you can have them forever. But it doesn't make any economic sense. Clear cut the forest, take the money, put it in the bank. You'll make 5 or 6% on your loan. Put it into Papua New Guinea, you can make 30%. So money grows faster than real things.
So in winding up, thought for what advice would you like to share with the millions of young people who are realizing the danger we're in as a planet and who want to do something with their lives that will make a difference?
Well, I thank them for the message. When I met Greta Thunberg, I said, the first thing I said is, I am so sorry. I thank you for what you're doing, but I am sorry. This should not be your job. At your age, you've got to be out discovering the world, the things that turn you on, that excite you. You've got to find, start on your future. You shouldn't be calling out the fact that you don't have a future. You shouldn't be the one saying, I take science seriously and we're heading for a catastrophe. That's what mom and dad are for. They should be the eco warriors. And
she's inspired hundreds of thousands of people who actually want to do something now.
I agree. I mean, she's she's an amazing girl. She's amazing. And I thank her. She's done more than you and I and everybody else put together. I'd like to think we've created a platform where she can break through the ceiling. But the challenge now is we had 500,000 people, most of them young people. I marched with them in Montreal last year. We seem to forget that now, the millions of kids around the world in 2019 were marching, demanding action. COVID brought that to an end, but we must not forget that. And I'm saying to the young kids, your mom and dad have got to be the warriors on your behalf, because your mom and dad are listened to by the guys in Ottawa. You don't vote. Future generations don't vote. The atmosphere doesn't vote. The oceans don't vote. Trees and birds and fish, they don't vote. So your mom and dad have to become eco-warriors on their behalf.
Yeah. So when you look back, you've had, 50 years of being an activist for change as well as a scientist. Are there any lessons you've learned? If young people are going to say, I'm going to devote 50 years of my life to changing the world, what wisdoms would you pass on to them in terms of staying power and achieving things?
Well, it's a very different challenge for these kids because it is really their future that is at stake. And it seems to me they've got no choice. There are lots of things that they can do in the way they live. But the important thing, I think, is to understand how deeply embedded they are in nature. And I love talking to kids in Toronto, and I say, when you turn on the tap, where does your water come from? They don't know. So I say, well, when you flush the toilet, I said, it comes from Lake Ontario. When you flush the toilet, where does that go? They don't know. I said, it goes out into tailings ponds, and after a while, it goes out into Lake Ontario. Then they begin to get, oh, you mean the water I'm drinking was the water that I was pooping and peeing in? Then you begin to understand a bit about what nature is doing for you so that you can drink it. And we've got to re-embed ourselves in nature. And the great thing, Guy, is that there are still people that live that way. They're called Indigenous people around the world. They're fighting for their land, not so that they can have more money. They're fighting for the land because they feel they have a responsibility to care for it. The Mohawks in Montreal are fighting the Oka development there. This little rinky-dink pine forest. It has nothing significant for their income. But they're saying, but we have a responsibility to care for that pine forest, and condominiums or golf courses do not belong there. They're telling us that we've got to look at our relationship with the land in a different way. And all through British Columbia, we've got that. If we give them the respect, we have much to learn from the Indigenous people.
So we should have elders going into every school, really, to pass on their knowledge and understanding.
Good point. Good point. Elders, if you look at the response of the Indigenous communities to COVID-19, they are totally freaked out because their elders are the most precious people in their society. And I think that elders in the dominance, that we got to step up now. I think the fact that well over 50% of all deaths have been in long care homes for elders. We hive them away. We don't give a shit about our elders, and so they are the victims.
So we have to wrap up now, David. As you, as one of our elders, are one of the most precious beings in Canada. So I'm hoping that you will keep track with David Attenborough and be still going in your late 90s. I want to thank you on behalf of all our viewers for such a long lifetime of commitment and passion and inspiration and brightness and cheerfulness. And so just thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Guy.
Thank you. And all to our viewers on...
I'm a big fan of everything you do as well.
Thank you. And to our viewers on Change the World, my name's Guy Dauncey. You've been watching Change the World with David Suzuki. Tune in next week for another scintillating interview with another big, juicy Change the Worlder. Thank you.